Hello, Mr. Hamza.
Yeah, it's okay. You already joined just now?
I am here.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you
Well,
so much for the invitation.
no, it's okay. It's okay. Well, we have the honor just to invite you.
Well, it is my honor to join you. I really appreciate the
Thanks a lot.
invitation so much, and I'm looking forward to our
It's
discussion.
okay. It's okay. Is it possible just to open your camera?
Oh, you can't see me. I can see me. Sorry. Oops. Can you see me now?
Well, I believe not.
Uh-oh. All right. Hold
Okay,
on.
let us.
Sir, we see
Yes,
her.
I'm pinging. I'm
We
pinging
see
this.
her.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
So can you see me? Can the
Well,
students who are here see me?
well,
Yes,
I'm going to check. I'm going to check. Students,
Yes, sir.
yes,
Yes,
Dr.
can you
Udo.
hear me? Can you hear me just
Yes,
now?
we hear you then.
we heard you.
Yeah,
Can you
it's
see me?
okay. No, it's
Can you see me
okay,
better now?
doctor. It's okay. By the way, doctor. Unfortunately, you see, the names of students are written in Arabic, and that's why once students want just to say something, we are going to ask them just to say their names orally. Okay, so you can know their names once they are going to ask you or to interfere or pose some comments. Okay.
Perfect. I'm just going to plug in my computer.
By the
So
way, doctor, yeah,
it's been an unexpectedly busy
yeah.
morning, so I apologize for that. I realized my computer isn't plugged in. All right, I am ready to go.
Yeah. Anyway, we say most welcome to you, doctor. We have the honor to invite you in this lecture. And on behalf of the Department of English, College of Education for Human Sciences, University of Babylon, we welcome you as, let me say, a lecturer for this meet. Along with my colleague, by the way, I have my own colleague who joined already, Dr. Wafa. Dr. Wafa, please. Dr. Wafa. Dr. Wafa, you hear me? Yes, Dr. Wafa, please open your mic. Anyway, well, in order not just to have so much time with this, and now it's the time for you just to present what you have. I believe that when you said something about, let me say, sharing, okay, you have to press sharing the screen. You may go to present now
Dr. Ahmed, can I say something?
Yeah, please. Yes. Now, Dr. Kathleen, Dr. Wafa,
Hello.
my colleague in the same department, okay, wants just to say something to you, please.
Perfect.
Hello, Dr. Kathy.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you?
How are you? How do you do? We are very glad to listen to a professor like you has this long experience in methodology, and I'm very glad to hear you. You are welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's a true honor. I'm very excited to speak with you today. Now, I have shared my screen, but I'm not sure that you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, it's okay.
You can see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, this is great news. So shall I give my brief presentation and then we can...
Yeah. Please do, please. Yeah,
okay.
Please do.
It's my understanding that you have likely seen... Oh, sorry, let me fix the view mode. View, presenter view. Oh, no. I never click the right button on PowerPoints. Slideshow, play from start. Okay. I think you can see the whole screen now, right? So I'm going to briefly tell you who I am. My name is Dr. Kathleen McGovern, and I'm a lecturer in the Applied Linguistics program at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I also serve as a TESOL specialist for the U.S. Department of State. And I'm currently, in addition to my academic work, managing a large grant project to help the local community where I live in Athens, Georgia in the U.S. With rent and utilities assistance for immigrants who have been negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, my area of specialization is TESOL pedagogies, and in particular, I look at creative multimodal TESOL pedagogies. So this is my new book that just came out last month on teaching language through drama, which ties in a little bit to our topic today, which is communicative language teaching online. So what is communicative language teaching and how do we approach it in an online environment are going to be the main things that I discuss today. And I hope to have a brief presentation. I think Mr. Hamza has already shared a lecture of mine with you, so I don't want to repeat too much. And then I hope to open it up to questions and discussion. So I'm going to skip our agenda for today. Communicative language teaching, as you likely already know, has at its heart communication, right? So the ability to actually communicate, not just speaking, but in writing and non-verbally across different languages. This is an early student-centered approach, which grew out of reaction to the audiolingual method. And the audiolingual method, as you've likely studied, is heavily grounded in this idea of getting it correct, getting it right, accuracy, and repetition. So repeat after me. Oh no, that wasn't correct. Do it again. Well, communicative language teaching decentered the teacher from language teaching approaches. So, and said, all right, the goal of this language is that students can communicate in the language. And so we must make space in our classrooms for students to engage in communication that is personalized and meaningful to them. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Richards and Rogers' quote that CLT's core characteristics are largely accepted as self-evident and axiomatic throughout the profession. So CLT, communicative language teaching, is really the springboard for a lot of other language teaching methodologies that have developed after it, in which the learner is centered over the teacher. It's grounded in the theory of communicative competence, which was developed by Himes in the early 1970s and emphasizes knowing when and how to say what to whom. So this is also important because it allows for more modern views of language that say there's not one correct language to use. So even if we take English, which is a global language, we're communicating in English right now. You are all therefore highly competent speakers of English. You may not be American dialect speakers, but there are multiple dialects and varieties of English that are equally valid and equally different. So language use in communicative language teaching depends heavily on the context. Is what you're saying correct for the context, for your particular interlocutor at the particular time? Underlying theories of language that underpin communicative language teaching is that language is a system for expressing meaning, and that meaning is negotiated both societally and amongst individuals. The principal purpose of language is to grant interaction and communication to its users. And the principal units of language are structural features like grammar, the present perfect, the simple past, etc. functional usage, so how we're using the language to accomplish certain goals or objectives that we have in our interactions, and communicative meaning or negotiation of meaning. So how you and I, or you and your interlocutors, either through speaking or writing, are collaboratively negotiating and understanding together in the target language. So CLT aims to promote genuine communication through real-life materials and scenarios, and steers away from building on textbook examples that seem removed or irrelevant from the needs and lived experiences of the students. And the last point is not blue, but I wish it were because I want to underline it. How do we teach to the needs and lived experiences of the students? Well, your students may be studying because they need to pass a university exam. They may be studying because they want to immigrate to the United States, because they want to conduct business with people in Japan through the language of English. So in this language teaching methodology, it's really important to understand what your learners' goals are. So the curriculum is designed to be adaptive and constantly changing, so that it's built really so that students can get out of it what they would like to, which is inherently thought to be motivating, although may not always be motivating, as we'll see in a second. So I'm going to skip through most of this. I think I talked about it in the lecture that I believe you already saw. But basically, when I say functions of language, this is a theory by Halliday from the late 1970s. And systemic functional linguistics is grounded in these functions of language. But communicative language teaching also draws from them to emphasize, what are we using the language for? And Halliday has these 7 categories of the functions of language, and I'll just talk about a couple of them. Instrumental, using language to get things. Could you please pass me the pen? And then down at the bottom, there are kind of more complex uses or functions of language, such as heuristic, or learning language to learn and to discover. When you read a textbook, for instance, you're engaging in the heuristic language function. Or when we interact in this online lecture, that's another form of heuristic functions of language. And of course, what you're using the language to do will influence how or which language you use, right? It wouldn't be appropriate in this context necessarily to swear and use vulgar language all the time, because it doesn't fit our function. So we can see that language in this way is also tied to pragmatics, what is or is not socially acceptable to say, and how can we say it or not say it. Okay, so what are the characteristics and techniques of communicative language teaching? First, there is activating schema. This means that we find out what our students already know about a given subject, and then we build on what they already know. We make language learning meaningful through personalized language use. And that doesn't mean, write an essay about your family. It might mean, let's say you are teaching biology through the English language in Iraq. Well, to personalize that language use, you might ask students to, through English, critically evaluate a scientific argument. Is there enough evidence to support the argument? So it's not necessarily, what's your opinion and what do you think, but it's incorporating students' own analytic abilities into the lessons. A really key feature is student talk time versus teacher talk time. And students are ideally and dogmatically supposed to speak much more than the teacher. Ideally, they speak 70% of the time, the students do, and the teacher only speaks 30% of the time. How do they do this? Through communicative activities like games, many of which I discussed in my recent book, information gap activities, where you give students different pieces of information. For instance, a map. If I gave you a map of the city of Paris or Baghdad and said, okay, map A has the train station, map B has the opera house, ask each other for directions, and find the missing information on your picture. Interviews, so asking students to interview their partner or their group and report back is another way to increase student talk time. Projects, for instance, developing a program for your university would be a project. If you do in English, that could be in communicative language teaching's repertoire of tools. And jigsaws, it's like an information gap, but many people have different aspects of the activity. So if I divided you into a group of 3 and one of you read one article on activating schema, the next group read an article on student talk time, and the third group read an article on personalizing language use, and you each report back, well, that means it's a jigsaw puzzle, because each person has a small, or each group has a small piece of information. And for everyone to have the whole information, then they have to really listen and interact with one another in the target language. So as you can see in those activities, pair and group work is a really big part of this. CLT also promotes multimodal approaches to learning. So using visuals, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. So getting students involved, up and moving, doing things, rather than what we're doing right now, which is sitting passively and listening to a lecture. And I think I'll skip the next point and go to the last, which is a balanced focus on fluency and accuracy. So I talked earlier about the audiolingual method. This is very heavily based in accuracy. Get it right. Communicative language teaching does emphasize accuracy, but at the same time it says, okay, you need to be able to use this fluently. So the teacher does not constantly correct learners, right? The teacher strategically determines what is the goal of the activity I'm asking my students to do right now. If the goal is for them to use language accurately, I'll provide error correction. If the goal is for them to experiment and take risks and develop to negotiate meaning, they may not immediately correct errors or ever correct errors, because they want students to self-correct as they negotiate for meaning. And this promotes creative use of language, which is actually a very important step in language learning. So myths. Some people think, well, in CLT, you can't teach grammar, you can't error correct, you can't give your students lectures, and you can only use it to practice the skills of speaking and listening. This is not actually correct, right? We can teach grammar, we do provide error correction, and we do give lectures, although there's supposed to be a small part, right? You need to give your students information, but then you want to build activities around that so that they can engage. And as I said before, CLT is used in writing and reading as well as speaking and listening. So there are some critiques of this. One, it can be really uncomfortable for teachers and students if they're from a culture, either in their institution or in their country, that values, well, a professor's role is to lecture, to tell students. They may not see the value of, okay, it's up to me to negotiate meaning. My teacher may not always be there correcting me. And one way around this critique is to explain to students, what is the value of you experimenting with language use and not having a teacher constantly tell you, do this, do that, no, that's not correct. Well, having a teacher constantly jump in doesn't mirror real life communication. And in communicative language teaching, we're really striving towards moving students towards autonomy so that they can use language for their own purposes outside of the classroom. A critique which I agree with is that no one method fits all classroom contexts. So CLT is probably less appropriate in an environment where you're preparing students to teach or take the TOEFL exam or another standardized test. But that's a really small part of learning language. If a student is going to take the TOEFL exam, which they often need to do if they want to study in the US or in England or in Canada, then passing the TOEFL is one part of that. But after they arrive here, they need to be able to communicate with their professors, at the grocery store, with the friends they will make in the target language. Some other critiques, well, this is an approach, it's not a method, and that's true. Communicative language teaching is an approach, which I think is a beautiful part of it, because you can take things that work for you and leave the things that don't work for you. Some people say there's not enough focus on getting it right. And in fact, it does take a lot of planning, because if you're planning the bulk of your lesson for your students to be engaged, you have to spend a lot of time beforehand. It's much harder than just putting together a PowerPoint. You have to design engaging activities that really connect to the goals of your learners. So that's CLT, but how does it work online? Well, very much like it does in person, through a mix of individual, pair, and group work, through a variety of modalities, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. Even though we're at our computers right now, we can stand up and move around. We can write. We can view videos and images. We can invite students' personal experiences and opinions into our classroom and draw from what they already know. We can use the same games, although in adapted forms, to teach communicatively online. We can be quiet, unlike what I'm doing right now. We can reduce the teacher talk time, and focus on authentic communication and authentic materials. So, and that's actually pretty, I would say, easier online than in an in-person classroom, because right now we're all connected to the internet, and the internet has a wealth of materials that are authentic, right? These are created by real people, not for language learning. And we can balance our focus on fluency and accuracy. So having some activities in which we ask students to really get it right, and some activities in which we ask them to experiment with language. So online learning is a huge umbrella, which encompasses many varieties of teaching. We've got synchronous, like we're doing right now, where we're all in the same lecture together, present at the same time. Asynchronous, when we don't see each other ever at the same time. We never come together to talk. Instead, we talk through writing in our Google Classroom or our FCC, on our learning management system, or hybrid, where you mix both. In my opinion, and actually in the research on online teaching, it's much easier to engage in student-centered teaching, communicative language teaching, in a hybrid model, because that allows students the time to both interact in real time with their teacher and their peers, but also reflect and respond, post their responses to prompts online, and engage with each other in their own time. So student-centered approaches in an asynchronous online course. This involves establishing your routine with your students via your syllabus and timeline. So if we're not all meeting together at the same time, students have to know what is expected of them. When do they post things? When do they read things? When are their assignments due? And keeping those regular helps students not to miss things, which can be really hard for students who are just beginning to learn online. It requires a lot of self-regulation. So when the teacher puts in those clear expectations and routines, it can help students to meet and exceed those expectations. Next, it's important to set up your learning management system so that you're promoting dialogue and genuine exchange of knowledge, opinion, etc. And when I say learning management system, I mean, for example, I think you're using Google Classroom. So where do you find things in the Google Classroom? What is required of you? When I teach language online asynchronously, I have students post to one another in groups on Wednesday and on Saturday of every week. On Wednesday, they make their initial response. They write what they thought about whatever we studied that week. And by Saturday, they have to respond to 2 people in the course. And they're not graded on their grammatical accuracy. They're graded on their exchange of ideas. So that's inviting students' opinions and personal experiences, right? Building off of students' interests and background knowledge, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can build options into your curriculum, right? So that students have different options to complete for their final assignments. They have agency over the sorts of presentations or writing assignments they will do. In group work, if you divide students into groups, that promotes a student-centered environment. And again, combining individual reflection, pair work, and group work. In synchronous online courses like we're doing right now, we still want to develop activities that promote a genuine exchange of knowledge. And we want to allow students time for group, individual, and pair work. So not only a lecture, but after the teacher gives their lecture, what are the students doing? And this is a key thing to keep in mind whenever you're lesson planning in a communicative paradigm. Not what am I saying to my students, but what are my students doing at a given time? If you're giving a lecture like I am right now, what do the students have to do afterwards? Are they taking notes? Are they going to have to present on what they learn or write about it? So what are the students doing? And varying whether they're doing individually or with their colleagues. Inviting their opinions and personal experiences, and that's a way to promote fluency, right? So I'm not grading you on, did you forget the S at the end of the third person verb? I'm grading you on, what did you say? Did you say it? Did you communicate it meaningfully? Did what you communicate add to our understanding of whatever it is we're discussing? Did it bring in your interests and background knowledge? And of course, we can play games and complete activities. And if you're interested in games and activities that can be played online, buy the book. I'm sorry, I have to take the opportunity to promote the book. But one chapter does focus on how to play games online for language learning. It's hard to do in large groups, though. It's much easier to do in smaller groups. So here are some examples. When I led the TESOL Specialist program, I created a scavenger hunt. And this is a game that you can play synchronously or asynchronously online. And it's designed to get students to know what is available in the course. So we can see here that your professor posted a wonderful lecture on descriptive writing in Google Doc and Google Meet. So the second item here was, okay, everybody, where can you find that lecture? And they can work on that in groups or alone. They're discussing in English, but they're really accomplishing a set task. This is another example from a course. This is a gallery walk. And in this, my students read a story about immigration in New York City over 100 years. They read the story, and then they read about multimodal theories of language learning and language teaching. And they were asked to synthesize their understanding of the book and their understanding of multimodal theory and pedagogy by creating something to share with the class that used 3 or more modalities. So here we can see a drawing. So this is text, image, and I think there was music that went along with this, in which the student, through a multimodal means of communication, took quotes from the book and illustrated them to interpret her own ideas about the book. After this, the students posted what they made online, and all the other students in our online class, which never met face-to-face, it was all asynchronous, had to view everybody else's contributions and then comment on the ones that they liked the most. And the person who got the most comments actually got extra credit in the course, which is designed to make students really want to do a good job on this project, right? And then synchronously, of course, we can use Google Suites. One of my favorite parts of Google Suites, which is like Gmail, Google Drive, Jamboard, Google Docs, and Google Sheets, is this functions in a synchronous course just like a blackboard or a whiteboard in person, where students can brainstorm together online and then discuss their brainstorms. So I think, maybe gonna stop talking for now. I have some troubleshooting challenges at the end. I have a potential activity that we could do, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Mr. Hamza if he would like to either open it up for questions and broad discussion, or we can try going into the Jamboard, but it might be hard if students are accessing it on their cell phones. So, Mr. Hamza, what would you like to do?
Yeah. First of all, we say thanks so much for your wonderful presentation. And I believe that is the time just to receive the questions and comments of the students, you see, rather than just going to the Jamboard. You see, now, I believe that your time is very limited and you have so many responsibilities, as you mentioned earlier. And we do appreciate all these things that you made in spite of these, let me say, tough work when you mentioned. So I believe that we are going to organize a classroom talk. Just we see the students who are having some questions about what is mentioned, but for the sake of organization, we need the student just to press on raise hand, and I'm going to choose accordingly. So I'm going to see and check, and then I'm going to choose and call by name. So please, for those who have a question, press raise hand. Okay, now we have Fatma Fadel. Fatma Fadel,
Yes.
please open your mic and talk.
Yes. Yes, Doctor.
Yes.
First of all, good evening.
Raise your voice, Fatma. Raise your voice.
Yes, Doctor. Hello, Doctor. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm very glad to speak with you, and thank you for your lectures to us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm
This
very
is very
happy to be here.
beneficial. Thank you so much. I want to ask you a question, if you don't mind, of course.
Sure, please do.
Thank you. When we say that we have, when we have a techniques or characteristics, or we have functions of communicative language teaching, do you mean this is advantages or not? It is difficult for us in the meaning or in the using?
So I didn't hear you for just a second, so let me ask if I understood your question. Are you asking if, because there are many different ways to use communicative language?
No. About not about the benefits, about the let me say, about the functions of techniques or the characteristics of communicative language teaching. It is similar of advantage, or it is difficult of that different? Sorry.
So well, please, Dr. Kathleen, I'm going to let me say, clarify the question. She's saying that with communicative language teaching, is it applicable? She feels that CLT is hard to be applied. This is her point. She's saying that is it possible just to apply this in teaching, because it needs so many things. You see, now it needs so many. Let me say, this is the idea. Yeah. She needs just to be sure that this method is easier to be applied. This is the idea.
Is that correct?
Is that okay, Fatma, or not? Just tell me.
It is okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's such an interesting question. I think communicative language teaching is easy to apply, but what is easy or what is not easy will depend on a teacher's individual preference and also their context and cultural background, right? I think something that I forgot to mention about my own background is that before I did my PhD, I worked as a teacher trainer in a TEFL program, so certifying people to teach English as a foreign language. And that program was designed to teach people how to teach communicatively. And in that program, we had, very rigorous training. So people would learn, it was rigorous training, but it was a lot of fun because people would learn how to play games, how to engage their students in speaking to one another, how to not talk so much in their classroom. And they were rated in a very specific rubric, right? So when they taught their classes, the trainers would observe them and give them marks like, oh, you spoke more than 30% of the time, or, oh, you didn't incorporate any games, or there was no pair work or group work, or great job getting students to share their personal experiences. And so I think that when students philosophically believe that communicative language teaching is an appropriate way to teach, it becomes really easy to apply. It's a matter of espousing the value that we don't always need to correct learners. There's more to language learning than just passing a test or getting a diploma. And that these strategies, there are so many of them, you can pick and choose the ones that work in your context. So I think people who espouse that value find it easy and natural to teach through CLT. Some people, and this is not wrong of them, right? It's just a different idea of language learning, really espouse the notion that I must get my students to pass this test. I must stick to my institution's curriculum. Whether or not they can communicate is not important to me. It's whether or not they can pass this test. Or they might have values saying, it's not so important whether they can communicate, but I need them to be able to explain how and when to form the future perfect progressive. And those people really struggled in communicative language teaching approaches. Some of them failed. I also worked a lot with Chinese language teachers, and they're teaching in contexts with many hundreds of students in one room. And a common criticism was, how can I use communicative language teaching with hundreds of students? And CLT really does work much better in smaller classes. But it's possible to use in larger classes. And China is very interested in incorporating CLT. Actually, they're investing a lot of money in training their teachers in that approach, because what they find sometimes is that their students, although they pass all of the exams, they can explain all the grammatical rules, if they then go to communicate in English with someone who doesn't speak Mandarin or Cantonese, they can't succeed. And that kind of defeats the purpose of ultimately learning the language. So I think it works. I think it works very well. It is my preferred method of teaching, but not everyone feels the same way, right? In applied linguistics and language teaching, there are so many pedagogical approaches and theories of language that you'll have to find the one that works best for you. And actually, I don't even now only teach through CLT. I use a post-method approach where I look at my students, I look at what they need, and I take what I think from all of these methodologies and approaches works best for them to meet their goals while remaining in the confines of my curriculum. Sorry, I talked.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Is it okay now, Fatima? Because we need just to see other students, you see now? Yes.
Thank you.
Who wants just to ask something, please raise your hand. Press the icon for raising hands. Students?
I saw someone raise their hand.
Well, let us see Abdullah. Abdullah Hakim.
Yes,
Abdullah.
yes, doctor. Yes, doctor.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, and first of all, good evening and nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay.
We are thankful for this opportunity to speak with the native speakers. I have one question. We have 4 skills: listening and speaking, reading, writing.
Raise your voice, Abdullah. Raise your voice.
Yes, yes, doctor. I hear. And we have 4 skills: listening and writing and reading and speaking. Excuse me. I am shy somewhat. We're in communicative approach. Which of these skills we must shed lights on it? We must using frequently to achieve a successful course in communicative approach.
That's a great question. And I think that ties into some misunderstandings about communicative language teaching, because sometimes when people hear communicative, they think, oh, this method is only for speaking and listening. But that is not the case. CLT emphasizes all 4 skills. So speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So I think speaking and listening are kind of evident, right? Especially like with interviews. Okay, have your students interview one another and then report back. That practices, you know, the simple past and reporting language. Okay, so I'm going to skip speaking and listening and go to reading and writing. Reading and writing are essential aspects to language learning for literate people, right? So we're all in a university context, we're all highly literate. So when we read and write, we follow kind of a different format in CLT. And first, the most important thing is to draw on what students already know. So what vocabulary do they know? What grammar do they know that they're going to encounter in the text or produce in the text? And then very importantly, what do they know about the topic that they're being asked to read or write about? So reading and writing lessons also incorporate speaking. If we're going to read, let's see what book I have here. Oh, whoops, all my books fell down. If we're going to read Jane Eyre, we might need to speak about, okay, what do you see in this picture? Where do you think the book takes place? What kind of story do you think it's going to be? A horror story, a romance story, a comedy? Yeah, when does it take place? We might flip through for pictures, there aren't any. And we'll get students talking about what they know. What do they know from the clues in the text? And they're speaking about that with their group, okay? We'll pre-teach the vocabulary and the grammar that students will encounter. We'll allow them time to read individually and then come back to their group to discuss, I didn't understand at all page 126. What does this expression mean? Who is this character? What's happening in this plot? And they'll work together and the teacher will help them. So in reading and writing, we rely on spoken communication, but we really are drawing from students' background knowledge and asking them to personalize their own relationship with the text. Additionally, when I talk about teaching vocabulary, we'll probably take an inductive approach. So I'm not going to look at this page and assume what my students do or do not know. Instead, I may ask them to scan the page and select vocabulary that they don't know. And then I may teach 5 to 10 words, and then they can go on. So communicative language teaching is really meant for all 4 skills, but in teaching those skills, speaking and listening is used across all 4 of them. I hope that answered your question.
Well, that's very fine. Yes, Tabarak Falah Abid Abdullah. Please, Tabarak. Tabarak.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Please.
doctor. Yes,
Yes, you raise your hand. You raise
first
your
of all,
hand. Yeah.
yes. Is it clear now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Please say your
Dr.
question.
Kathleen. My question is, if you say that CLT is the most important method to be used at school, what makes it different from other methods?
Yeah, that's
It's special to use.
That's a great question. So I'm not sure I do think it's the most important method. I think, so just personally what I think is that the most important thing for people in a language education course is to know about all of the methods and select the ones that are supported by sound theories and match their context. That said, the method I use the most is communicative language teaching. And it's kind of, I would say, an important language teaching methodology because in the history of language teaching methodology, it marks a break. First, we had grammar translation approaches, and that's from ancient times, right? Let's read this, translate it, analyze the grammar, analyze the literary traditions. And if you're studying this, if I'm studying Arabic, for instance, I'm doing it in English, right? So it's all translation. Then during the Second World War, soldiers suddenly were deployed across the world and found that despite their language training, they couldn't communicate with anyone they met in other countries. So language teaching methodologies had a strong reorientation in the 1950s or so, where they were trying to find, okay, how can we teach people to actually be able to speak and listen and read and write with other people who don't speak their own native language? And I think communicative language teaching is the first method that moves in a student-centered direction. So away from, if it's not correct, if you misconjugated the verb, then you don't speak this language, towards an understanding that language happens in negotiation. We problematize the native speaker, right? Like, I was born speaking English, or, you know, from a few days of my birth, I was born speaking English. But there are many valid varieties of English spoken around the globe. So I think communicative language teaching allows these more progressive and modern understandings of what language is, why and how people learn it to play out in the classroom. Communicative language teaching also informs more modern approaches to language teaching, such as in US K-12 schools. Probably the most common approach is called sheltered English immersion. And that is a very, like, I think I have a book on this here. This is like a very common way in US elementary schools to teach language. And it's communicative language teaching really at its heart, but with a lot of steps. I would love to be able to find this. This is probably taking too much time. It's like a checklist. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you promote your students' culture? Did you allow them to rely on their native language? So I think communicative language teaching is a really important one to study because it's the one from which all the more modern methodologies, I think, sprung up. Right.
That's very fine. Okay, Mohammed Hamid. Mohammed Hamid.
Yes, Doctor. How are
Yes.
you? Dr. Kathleen. Nice
Hello.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Actually, we are thankful for you, and we are glad for having you here with us. Actually, and thanks a lot for your informations. I am sure that we are that it will benefit us in our study. Actually, so thanks a lot. Yes. My question is simple. I just want you to clarify to me actually the teacher's role in this methods actually, because as you know, we are in the future we will become teachers. So I will use this method. Actually, I like it because it is give the students the freely or opportunity to speak in a freely way actually, and also it make the students get rid of the barrier of shyness actually. So and so on actually. So I just want you to clarify the teacher's role or the main missions that the teacher will do in the class or between the students actually.
You know, that's such a great question, and it reminds me of, I've got a book somewhere else here that has that broken down. What is the teacher's role? But in communicative language teaching, the teacher's role kind of changes depending on what the activity is. So sometimes it's to I'm going to say the most important role is to facilitate students' communication by stepping back and allowing students to take the floor. But of course, that's not all the teacher does, right? They have to provide new information to their students. So the teacher's role is a planner, right? Really carefully thinking about, okay, how can I make sure my students get new information, but I'm not just talking at them the whole time? And then the teacher's role is to step back and to facilitate, to set students up for success. So to monitor the students. Okay, what do they need help with? Are they staying on task? To be an error corrector when it's appropriate, but to step back from the role of authoritarian. So I am the teacher, you will do what I say. That is not the role of the teacher in communicative language teaching. Of course, sometimes it becomes that, right? If you're teaching very young children, for instance, it is your role as the teacher to keep the children on track and engaged in the activity. So in communicative language teaching, the teacher wears many different hats and carries many roles or responsibilities. But all of the roles, I think, come together to balance out the teacher stepping back, allowing the students to experiment and do the work, while also making sure they're supported and on task.
It's okay. That's very fine.
Thank you.
Any other question? Any other question? Any other question? Please raise hand if you have. Well, I believe that there is something, yeah, there is something missing. Okay, Fatima Zahra. Fatima Zahra.
Yes, Fadil.
Yes,
Yeah.
doctor.
Fatima Zahra Ali Salim. Yes. Yes. Yes, please.
Yes.
Fatima Zahra.
Yes, I'm talking. Is my voice is enough?
Well,
Yeah.
we need just to make your voice a little bit louder. Yeah.
Okay, what about now?
It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm really glad that I'm talking to you, and I'm thank my Professor Dr. Ahmed because he gives us this opportunity. I want to, mention some kind of story that I have. When I was in a middle school, there's kind of a teacher that it's have the same way in teaching us, but she wasn't able to control every student in the class. We were, just like loud voices and everything was in mess. What kind of abilities that could I have to control this? Because we are not children we were not children and not we couldn't gathered in group in correct way. She have this lack of something. I wasn't know what is it until now. I didn't know. So if you know what she miss or what we will have to control the groups of classes and children's.
Thank you. That's an important question as well. I think that hinges on classroom management, right? And you're totally correct that it's not just a matter of age. I've had adult classrooms in which arguments have broken out or they've gotten too loud or said, I don't want to do this. So when I was teaching my TEFL course, right, and students were stepping into a classroom for the first time, sometimes they felt very nervous or they struggled with what the last question talked about. What is my role here? Is it to be my student's friend or is it to be their teacher and to maintain a clear line? Like, I'm not your friend, I'm your teacher. You do what I say. In classroom management of communicative language courses, it can be tricky, especially for students who perceive communicative language teaching as not really teaching at all. So what I do in these cases is to explain to students why I am asking them to do what I'm asking them to do. So if they perceive it, oh, I'm just going to talk to my friends, I clearly explain to them the theories and research about why this will help them learn a language. Second, and this is not from any research, this is from my personal experience. I don't research classroom management, although I think there probably are articles written about what you're talking about. In my experience, it is better to start off as not your student's friend and more of your student's disciplinarian, so that, especially with younger learners, right? Not so much university students, but with younger learners. Otherwise, if you set the bar low to begin with, it can be very easy for students to say, no, I'm not doing that, and just walk all over your authority. So this will depend on the interpersonal dynamics in the classroom, why students are there, how motivated they are to learn a language. In middle school, it's kind of tough because children often want to play with their friends. They don't want to, you know, they're probably not so concerned with, well, if I don't learn English, I won't get a job. And if I don't get a job, blah, blah, blah. So clearly articulating why you're asking students to do what they do, and B, not backing down. You told your students to get into a group and do this activity. If they're not doing it, there needs to be consequences. So communicative language teaching doesn't mean, okay, you talk. It means carefully saying, no, you have 5 more minutes left. If you don't have your report ready, I will dock 5 points from your grade. So there still have to be consequences. Now, sometimes you'll have a wonderful group of students who are inherently motivated to learn a language, and then it can be a lot of fun. It can still be fun if you need to discipline them. But yeah, CLT doesn't mean that you don't manage your class. It's still important to make sure students are kept on track.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kathleen. I don't know whether, is that the end of the questions that we have? Fatma, you took your role, but I believe that if we have any other students.
I see one more
no
student.
Other students? No more students. I mean, we have the same student who asked the first question. That is Fatma Fadel. Yeah, here, you know, the time is about just to finish. You know, we decided just to have 1 hour because of your responsibilities. But I believe that there is something missing.
I apologize for not being able to talk too long earlier because I was in like
yeah.
But I can stay for a couple extra minutes if you would like me to. I'm happy to stay. I've reserved.
Well,
okay.
What I want just to say that there is something missing. You know, our topic is about shaping the relatedness between CLT and online learning. You see now, all the questions focus on CLT in particular. Okay, I don't know why not just to have some questions about this relationship. Of course, Doctor, you mentioned this earlier in your lecture, and you explained this in detail. But I believe that the reason students, do not have enough idea about this relationship. And I believe that when they listen once again to the lecture, because it is recorded, I believe that they are going to draw the relationship between the two things. So any other question? I believe that we don't have, but let us give the chance for Dr. Wafa, my colleague, if she has something just to say. Dr. Wafa, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kathleen. I don't have a question, but I would like to thank Dr. Kathleen for this great and information which are given to our students. Really, our students need to listen to a native speaker, and they really need to listen to this information because they will be teachers in the future and need this information to apply a communicative approach in their classes. Our curriculum, Dr. Catherine, our curriculum, which is adopted in primary, intermediate, and secondary stages in Iraq, really depended on communicative approach. I think you know. Therefore, we want our student to we want to train them and focus on communicative approach to be applied in the class. So thank you very much for this great lecture, great information, and in the name of our students, I would like really to thank you. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. It's an honor, and it's been wonderful getting to know you and to speak with you all. I'm deeply appreciative of the honor.
Well, is it possible just to listen to Zahra Ali? This is the last question that we have. Is it possible? Yes, Zahra Ali. Zahra Ali Talib. Zahra Ali Talib. You listen to me? Open your mic. Zahra Ali Talib. Well, I believe that there is something wrong with her.
I see some messages saying so-and-so has left the meeting. I think some people are struggling with internet.
Yeah, because of electricity, by the way. I'm going to tell you something. That, here, electricity and net is the problem here in Iraq. And that's why some students are leaving unwillingly. You see now, they are not deciding just to leave. Yeah, this is the idea. Zahra, can you hear me? Yeah. Zahra, can you hear me now? Zahra Ali Talib. Well, I believe that she left. Well, by the end of this lecture, we are saying that words are not enough just to thank you for this time that you specify to represent the information that you have. And with this, I may be, let me say, greedy. If I say greedy, just to what? When I say greedy, it means that I'm going to ask you for other things just to prepare in the future, if you don't mind. I believe that when we have some sort of debate between your students and my students, it will be better. So if it is to be done in the future, I'm not going to say in the near future, if it is possible, and this is my aim. If it is possible,
I think that would be a lovely idea. I have just finished teaching for the spring, and I am not teaching for the summer, so that would have to wait until the fall. Our university system typically ends in May. September. But I think
you
it's a
are
wonderful
following.
idea.
You are following semesters, and that's why you are not having lecture just now. But we are following another system that is course study. Thanks so much for everything. And we are going to, let me say, have something to you, because here, when we are having this lecture, it means that we have some sort of, let me say, adding some extra information that is not found in our, let me say, resource or our references that we have, especially the let me say, the information which is having about, let me say, the relationship between CLT and online learning. And with this, we are going to finalize this lecture. We again, we repeat our thanks to you so much for your effort that you exerted in this lecture. Thanks so much for you all.
Oh, thank you. I have just put, I saw a question in the chat, and since we're ending, I just put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Okay?
That's so generous from you. You see now, that's very kind of you, Doctor. You see, students, now the email for Dr. Kathleen is available to you in the chat. You can contact her the time that you wish, in order just to have some sort of, let me say, extra information, or let me say references, other things that will help you in the course of CLT. So shall we say goodbye, Doctor?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I have to go grade essays.
No, it's okay.
This morning.
It's okay. No, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you.
Take care, and thank you so much. It was wonderful meeting you all.
Thanks so much, Doctor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.